Welcome to the TA Disruptors podcast, where I get to speak to some incredible thought leaders and TA disruptors in the recruitment field about some of the biggest challenges that talent acquisition are facing. Those that thrive and survive will be the ones who are able to adapt and anticipate some of the changes that are coming about in the GenAI world that we now live in. And today I'm very excited to welcome Claudia Nuttgens from Alexander Mann. You are the global head of assessment, and AMS, that many of our listeners will be familiar with, is the global talent solutions company that does some amazing things in terms of all sort of talent solutions, recruitment process outsourcing. I'm sure Claudia will share a bit more about that. But as someone who heads the assessment advisory team at AMS, you are strategically advising your clients on the most innovations and improvements in assessment and selection space. And I know that some of the things that you've done in the past with the likes of Rolls-Royce have won awards for the way that you have made significant improvements. You're a chartered occupational psychologist and an executive coach with over 20 years of consulting and coaching experience, so bringing a wealth of knowledge about best practice around assessment, selection and development. So welcome, Claudia, to the podcast.
Thank you.
And perhaps you could just give us a short explanation and background about what you do at AMS and the team that you look after.
Sure, yeah. So I've been leading the team for about 4 years now, just over 4 years. We are a group of assessment and selection specialists. We're business psychologists. Some of us are chartered. And we provide an advisory service for end-to-end assessment. We sit in the technology advisory function, so that the clue is in the question there in some respects, that we are very much about end-to-end assessment processes rather than individual assessments. We advise on anything assessment related, so it could be to do with assessment frameworks, it could be to do with validation, test selection. We also design bespoke tests, and we do hiring manager training around assessment, so that we've got quite a mixed portfolio within that specialism. We are global. We do most of our work currently in UK, EMEA and APAC, but we are growing all the time. So yeah, it's a really exciting team and a great time to be doing it. So yeah.
I bet. And I think with all the sort of transformation that's going on, not just around GenAI, but digitization, the demand for your expertise and services is growing strongly, because we really have to think hard about what we measure and how we measure it in the recruitment, especially at a time where there's a lot of still, sadly, inequality. So doing it in a robust and fair way is so important. And I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that particular point of from your perspective, what makes a really robust and fair and ultimately one that finds the people with the best potential to fulfill the role that your clients are looking for?
So I suppose I'm a traditionalist, so I don't think it's core principles really. I was back in the day, I was involved in the assessment centre standards board for the DOP, right, Division of Occupational Psychologists, and I still look at that as a reference point, and I see that very much how we still need to do things. So the big thing for us is having clear criteria. We start with that almost always. So whilst we're seeing everyone talking about potential, everyone talking about skills, really that doesn't change the way we work. So with our clients, we would always say, before you go and buy a product, before you go and decide that you need to have this approach, what is it you are trying to measure? It's the fundamental question. It's really the only starting point. So we do spend a lot of time on that. What I think, I could answer lots of different aspects of that question, I suppose, but what I think we're seeing at the moment is, maybe it's wishful thinking, but a slight return to really good design, because we know that a lot of GenAI is threatening the validity and fairness of a lot of the traditional assessment tests. Mm-hmm. And so what we're looking forward to next year, and already is starting to see, is a richer relationship with the client around design. And really also forcing AMS don't have any assessment product. We don't sell any. What we do is we work via partners, and partners, we're going to be pushing on partners to prove the validity of their instruments. We're going to be working with them to be more innovative and inventive in the way that they respond to this. And, a lot of them are leading the way anyway. We don't need to push them. It's real for them. But it's very much feels like we're going to have to take a partnership approach with clients and providers over the next year. So it's actually quite a fun time for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an amazing opportunity that we've not had for a long time.
Definitely.
To really force a rethink, and I'd just like to explore a bit more your point about the success criteria, because I think that is so important. One of the things that's sort of interesting for me around this is around cognitive ability.
Yeah.
In this, and there's been quite a lot recently questioning, the strength of cognitive ability, and we've seen Sackett challenging a bit the original Hunter and Schmidt.
Steve Woods and
absolutely, that's right.
Paper, yeah.
And where in a world now where so much of our roles are knowledge-based and strong knowledge, what's your take on cognitive ability, and how much should we weight in the success criteria here? Have any of your views started to change around that?
I think so, yeah, if I'm really honest. So I think we've always relied on the fact that we had evidence, albeit flawed, that you could get good predictive validity from cognitive assessments if they were role relevant. And that's what the kind of basic standard that my team would operate on, that whilst we would never use them as a screening tool on their own, for instance, so we favour a much more blended approach. But we do know that for certain roles there were clear links between cognitive ability and performance in roles. So what I think is, got to get to grips with the new kind of ideas around this and what the challenge is now. But I think what we're seeing much more hesitancy. Now, we were already seeing it because we are finding that the adverse impact is very real from those assessments. I don't know. I don't know if anyone's done a meta-analysis on this, but I feel like the adverse impact is getting worse on cognitive. We are seeing pockets of it happen more often, whereas before we could rely on a test that had been on the shelf for a while, not to produce that. But in some of our early careers populations, we are seeing it happen.
Why do you think that is the case? Do you think that's just the design, or maybe there are other factors in there? Because obviously those things have been around for a while. So why suddenly that creeping in a bit more now than it has done before?
I mean, I'm a practitioner, so I'm not an academic. As much as I try to keep up to date with the evidence base, I don't know. But what my sense is, and I have teenagers as well, so I'm basing it a bit on personal experience, but my sense is the education system is deeply flawed.
Right.
But maybe we were training people better at school to perform on those sorts of tests in the more traditional approach to education. I think now there's not a level playing field. People aren't coming out of education with the right skills and with the same skills, and therefore their performance on those more traditional assessments is really varied. And I also think it's very alien. Some of those, it's a very alien way of thinking. Doesn't really reflect job-related skills, and that's one of our. For some it does, and where we think there's a proper match, we would try them.
Yes.
But we are seeing certainly for certain types of reasoning assessments, the justification for it just isn't there anymore.
Yes,
So,
yes. And I think that's really interesting on the job related, and it comes back to your first principles on this, and that's changing. It's changing now. And if you think we have the capability of GenAI to do that reasoning and very, competent reasoning for us, are you starting to think about the different things that we might actually, from a knowledge worker point of view, that we're looking for on this? Are we looking a bit more for problem solving skills? So it's the actual the way that you go about problem solving, rather than specifically can you just get to the answer? Because I feel that's a little bit about what the old style of tests was. Can you process information and give me a right or a wrong answer? Yeah. Whereas now it's a bit more how you arrive at the answer in there, the way that you approach it, perhaps with creativity and curiosity. Is how's your thinking beginning to
Yeah, and I think that, a lot of the writing and the input on GenAI has been, don't be too frightened, because really all it's going to do is leave us, strip back the kind of basic tasks within a role, and all the more human stuff around into, our relationships with each other, our complex thinking, spontaneity, creativity, is something that those tools can't do for us. Now, I mean, I've got to say, I'm not entirely sure that's right, but I think that's where we are at the moment. So what we are talking about is that, and I could give you many examples, but one of the things that we're really grappling with on behalf of clients at the moment is the drying up of certain skills. Right. So we have really, very difficult talent markets for certain skills, and I'm sure that's not news to you.
Yes.
And what we're trying to do now is come back with clients with some suggestions for how we can measure what it is that differentiates between a machine and basic skills, and that person performing really well and possibly being able to transition to other roles, similar roles in the future. And that's hard. What we're looking at, because clients come to us saying they want that, but when we probe, there's a disparity between what they ask us for and then what they really want.
Yes.
So we have one of our questions around this whole skills-based, around the Gen I thing. How far forward do you want us to think?
Yes.
Or do you want us to think about assessing for the jobs you've got open tomorrow?
Yes.
And that's a big topic. In fact, we're writing a product for our early careers team to take to the clients, about advising them about how to deal with this in the early careers space, early talent space. And that's one of the considerations, is where are you setting your sights? Do you want to solve for now, or do you want to solve for the future? Because that's a big question.
It is, and it's such an interesting one, because as you highlight, it's changing so rapidly. This digitization is, we're seeing some roles that will disappear, new roles that are being created, and a lot of the new roles that are being created, there's either no experience for it because they're new roles, or there's very few people with the skills in there. So that means we have to think about differently, particularly in that early careers space, as to what are we actually looking for. Is it more around coachability? Is it more around learning agility, critical thinking? Because they're actually going to have to apply that in many different things as their career evolves and changes. And it's another reason why I think it's so important to have that independent advisory capability on this, because it's so complex and it'd be interesting as to how you support your clients on determining what to use and how to use. Because if you don't have your expertise as a chartered psychologist, and you just go out to the market, you put in assessment products, there's just hundreds out there that will come from a Google search. What are the things that you sort of say, look, this? I think you've heard a little bit about validity, but I'm sure there are others.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the core of what we do. So we work with a mixture of clients. So our clients are very big, usually, enterprise, and they usually already have assessment providers. Right. So our job isn't to go in and say, oh, you're doing it all wrong. Our job is often to kind of look at what they've got, look at what they're trying to achieve, look at what their workforce challenges are, look at their plans. Now, I would say that my team often work as part of broader TA diagnostics. Yes. So we do a mixture of work. So some of our work is very much isolated to just the assessments. And but a lot of it is much more joined up than that. And that's the exciting stuff. So once we've got an understanding of where an organisation is going, usually in a particular kind of skill area or function, sometimes actually just for all permanent hiring or for all early careers programs. But we basically will then say, well, this is what you've got. These are the gaps in your provision. And this is why you've got gaps in your provision. So it might not be because of the provider. It might be because they don't have any internal expertise. And so they've been using it in a particular way that doesn't make sense. They haven't validated. That might be another one. It could be that the hiring managers aren't trained. So they've got this amazing assessment suite. And then it gets to the end of the process and the hiring managers just, are all over ignoring it. So we have a kind of standard framework for it, but we are very flexible around it. And we basically look at all the systemic. So I come from a management consulting background. Right. So, that's the bit of work I love. I've been a psychologist in that space, but I get that it's bigger than the assessment tools.
It is.
And then we basically say, these are some suggestions. The implications of you taking that one are you have to integrate with your ATS and it's going to take you a year. Mm-hmm. But this one's, we could do this alert standalone and it's much less problematic. So we kind of work like that.
Steer a bit on that. Yeah, which is incredibly useful.
Yeah.
One of the things, just going back to systemic, and we share a similar passion for improvement around diversity, particularly neurodiversity, and the way a number of processes in larger organisations work is they don't always support the neurodivergent community.
Yeah.
And so perhaps you could share a bit how you advise your clients to address some of those systemic areas that perhaps have been holding back some of the marginalised communities that have not had the right opportunity. Yeah, sure.
So I would caveat it by saying I'm not a neurodiversity expert, though I have worked with the lovely Nancy Doyle at Genius Within. And I also have an autistic son who's 14, so I've got kind of vested interest. Yes. And I did do some work with Genius Within previous to working at AMS. So I kind of, I suppose I'm well versed in the issues. I think my attitude towards it is, if you've got a job that a neurodiverse person could really, really thrive in and perform brilliantly in, why would you have an assessment process that they can't pass?
Yes.
So we would reverse engineer it in a way to say, and I mean, you flagged Rolls-Royce, but Ellie there, I mean, she is such a great client partner because she shares that ethos. The other client we have is a professional services client who I know has worked very heavily with Genius Within and the team there to really do such great work there about the neurodiversity. They've got a recruiter toolkit which is free on their website around neurodiversity.
Yes.
So there's some great work being done, and I think it's down to individual cases. But it's interesting talking to neurodiverse people though, because you ask them about cognitive assessments, for instance. Some of them say I love them. Others say I hate them. So there isn't really a one answer to this.
Yes.
But I think it's mindful, being mindful. We try to train our recruiters to be very aware of the issues, arm them with some decent tools. A lot of our providers have sort of adjustment toolbars, the usual things you'd expect. But yeah, it's not a simple thing.
It's not. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try harder. But I think you're right that we just need to be aware that this is a broad spectrum. There's a spectrum within autism. There's a spectrum within the neurodivergent community, and so there's not a one-size-fits-all for this. There has to be an element of making some adjustments in some parts of the process, and in other parts it may be a completely parallel process around this. So what are the sort of things that I suppose you advise clients around that? Do you sort of get them to test it? Do you like the genius within to go in and just do how actually put somebody through the process and check how do they feel about it? Or
I mean, we often pilot a lot of the work we do. We've also work in consultation with the ERGs in that space, and we will have in early careers. It's quite often that we are able to pilot with different groups. So that would be our general rule of thumb. I think we can provide explicit advice about certain conditions, so that's great when we can. And for instance, it's a simple thing, but in interview guides, when we're talking about how a candidate responds, including additional information, watch outs for people who are neurodiverse, how they might not have eye contact and things like that. So there's some really kind of simple things that make a big difference. And we actually found, I feel like it's less so at the moment. I feel the awareness, I don't think we ever need to stop, but I think people's awareness is much better. But we often had to do some work really educating hiring managers about different conditions. And I think that really helps. But I wonder whether we've tipped too far into automation and in assessment and too far into digitalisation. And what we'll see now is a slight reversal, and we're seeing more humans in the loop, a bit more. We're starting to see that change, and having early human contact in a process is starting to feel like the right thing to do.
That's really interesting, particularly around that sort of reassurance for people too. Just on that note of too much automation and where automation's coming in, I'd like to one of the interesting pieces of research that came out of, or stat that came out of the research that we did, is that we found that the neurodivergent community were higher users of GenAI in the application process than neurotypical. And so if you're dyslexic or dyspraxic, for example, having a tool that helps you write better application forms, answers, is really useful. And one of the things that is clearly coming out at the moment is we see in the education sector, like if you apply for UCAS, they give you advice on where GenAI can be used, should be used, and where actually you probably shouldn't use it, or poor use of it. Have you had any of your clients come into you saying, actually, this is really quite troublesome for us? What's your perspective, Claudia, on do we embrace it, or what do we do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a daily question. So we're putting together responses daily. So however, we're trying to coordinate the effort a bit, because obviously we've got lots of teams at AMS who are interested in it. So what we're seeing is everything on a spectrum from people. Literally, I had a client meeting last week where the client said, sorry, what? Hadn't even occurred to them. To clients who are going, sorry, stop everything. We are not continuing with this. Okay, so we've got that. Panic, absolute headless chicken panic to completely ignoring it. What we're trying to do is get that middle ground. So what we're trying to do is really start to say to people, right, is GenAI something you're going to be using in your organisation? Is it going to be used as part of these jobs? It's not cheating. Why is it cheating? It's no different to a graduate asking their mum to help them with their application form. Not really, or a calculator. So that's, I wouldn't say we're embracing it. I'm probably more of a traditionalist than some. So my viewpoint still is that I don't really want the team to use it for design, not yet, because I don't think we have the skills, and I feel like we are giving away our IP into the world of data.
So you'll be careful.
And I also think then we just exacerbate the problem, essentially. Yes. And there is a real validity problem with many of the solutions that we oversee or that we would have recommended a year ago. So there is, we have to be honest with clients, is that if you've got a simple SJT, as an automated first stage response, it is likely that it is very easy to complete with ChatGPT.
Yes.
So really what you're going to find is the curve is going to change. You're going to get lots of high performance. It's not going to work for you anymore.
Yes.
And that's we're having to be really honest. And that took, I would say, it's only in the last sort of 6 weeks, 2 months where we started to nail it and say, maybe 3 months, and say, don't use verbal reasoning assessments.
Right.
Simple SJTs, strip them out.
Strip them out.
Yeah. Now, we weren't saying that before, but I think we've now realised the evidence is there that we have to say it.
Yes. Yeah. That's fascinating, because it's so interesting. You were saying you had that kind of spectrum. There's still people out there that go, really, do I have a big problem here?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, we're creating a huge problem by saying that. So that then what we don't want is them scrabbling around and then suddenly buying something else.
Yes, as a knee-jerk reaction.
To plug in as a knee-jerk reaction. So what we're saying is, right, well, we'll help you with the data monitoring. We can look at the curve. We can look at whether or not you can still use it. We've had things like, I've got a meeting next week with a team from the Netherlands for a client who are saying we're seeing wholesale cheating on DI. So they can see that there's identical responses in people are using it as a script.
Yes.
Digital interview.
A digital interview, right, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And we're saying there's nothing you can do. So we've given you a scoring framework. For now, we are redesigning the questions.
Yes.
But even that's not going to solve the problem.
Yes.
We've shortened it. We've made it much more personal. We're trying to kind of discourage the use of ChatGPT on its own to do that.
Yes.
We're using comms to say, please, we want to hear about you.
Yes.
Use ChatGPT, but don't use it on its own.
Yes, exactly, Claudia. And this is where I think we need to get on the front foot on this one. It's no good saying it's cheating. I'm with you on that one, because for some people it's an aid and it just feels wrong. And there are elements of it that clearly, under any definition of cheating, it would be cheating. But then you get into the grey area, and if you're using it to help prepare, then is that cheating? If you're using it to help support you in your thinking about how you might answer some of the questions in the digital interview, that's not really cheating. And so the blanket term, all use of AI, I just feel undermines the employer brand on that.
It does.
But we do then have this challenge that, okay, where is it acceptable? And most importantly, where do we want the human element to come back in again? And I think that's where we need to get to on this, and saying, here's an acceptable use of it, but cutting and pasting, if you do that, it'll be obvious, and you're just not going to differentiate from anybody else. And so we need to support people. We need some transparency and some guide, particularly in early careers. Because back to some people just haven't had the support on that, so they just don't know what's right or wrong.
But I think we're reaching a tipping point in early careers, because I feel like everybody's got quite similar processes. So what that's enabled, it's enabled candidates to bulk apply to lots and lots of programs.
Right.
And I know that that's not what the intention was. So I think it's almost like we need to tackle the problem somewhere back. So we've got clients who get tens of thousands of candidates per hire, and really all they can do is automate screening. There's nothing else, because otherwise they're literally
can't manually
looking at CVs and just randomly throwing them into piles. So we have to do something quick, effective to help them.
Yes.
Or we have to start thinking about a stage before assessment, which is around funneling people a bit better. Because the problem in the name of diversity, many clients have opened their funnels right up. They've done lots of attraction, But of course, then you've just got these huge populations applying. So it is a really interesting dilemma. The gains that we've had through opening up funnels are also now presenting problems.
So you've got that trade-off, and I think that's the thing that people need to sort of work out on this. I'm completely behind the removing the degree piece on this, because it served a purpose in the past, 2-1 cut off, but it clearly was a limiting factor, and so I welcome the kind of openness around this. But now we have all sorts of little tools that while you sleep, you can put an application. I think it's interesting what you were saying. The many processes are similar in the early career space, so it almost becomes a little bit of a cut and paste.
Yeah.
And so the education around that is more important than ever around this. And therefore the guidance has to come forward, on career sites. And interesting, part of your advisory element, I wonder now, is changing of, okay, there's different things that we need to be assessing for and looking for. That needs to be reflected in saying to people, these are the kind of things that we're looking for. So if that resonates with you on that, but then thinking about, well, how do we give them the opportunity to work out whether they do have those things before they then get thrown into the recruitment process and committing a lot of time to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we obviously have very different solutions for different hire types as well.
Yes.
So you talk about, there are very different problems in the early career space as there are, say, in tech hiring, or, we see in sort of skilled workers, trades, or, more leadership hiring. There's very different problems. So, and that's the thing. That's the other thing my team have to do. We have to pivot a lot from the different hire types and really think about the uniqueness of the talent market. We've got a brand and attraction team we work very carefully with, and they're experts in, the talent value proposition and all of that sort of thing. So we actually often are very informed by kind of work together on thinking about the messaging and what they're trying to do with the funnels as well. And obviously the RPO teams, we need to help them. Sometimes our solutions are part of what we offer clients.
Yes.
In which case we have to balance quality of candidate, time to hire with efficiency. So, we've got a lot to think about and a lot to get right. One of the things about the reaction to GenAI is it will affect efficiency, and we've got to kind of work with our clients for them to understand the tolerances about that. There's been a real trend. I haven't been in recruitment for my entire career, but there's been a trend to take stuff away from hiring managers, because the idea that it's less efficient to have hiring managers doing things. They're perhaps less good at making objective judgments. But actually, I have quite a lot of sympathy with hiring managers' frustration with that. They know their jobs, they know their teams, they know their culture really, really well. I do wonder whether we're going to have a flip back to more hiring manager involvement in the process.
More in person. So and that'll mean potentially more cost around all of this. And so that has to be, at a time where many organisations are reducing the amount of spend that they have on talent acquisition in their own teams are being shrunk around this. So you're back to that trade-off between efficiency and effectiveness and human touch, candidate experience around this. And so do you see actually the trend is going to be to bringing more people in person now rather than trying to do it all digitally?
Yes, I think so. That's what we're anticipating next year, is that there will be a greater emphasis on later stage assessments. Like I said, probably more recruiter phone calls, involvement at the beginning. I mean, we make huge efforts to make the automation feel human.
Yes.
There's ways of doing that we think are really successful, but we can't ignore the fact that AI will mean that candidates are going to start looking very similar if we're not careful. And so at some point we have to make judgments based on how they respond to another human being, what they do when they're put under, when they haven't got time to prepare. So if that's a characteristic of the job, you know, spontaneity,
Yes.
then we're going to have to bring people in, or at least proctoring technology we are looking at the moment. It's really problematic.
It is.
So at the moment, we don't have any clients using it legally, I think ethically, proctoring.
You're into all sorts of challenges around that. I'd just like to explore that a little bit about legally, because is that something that you're having to factor in now? Because we've obviously got in New York, there's new legislation around any kind of use of automated screening in there. We've got the new EU Digital Act that's coming out too. So how is that impacting your thinking about design and, I suppose, the advice that you're giving clients too?
Yeah, so we have taken this very seriously at AMS. So with, obviously, for obvious reasons, we manage risk very carefully. So we formed a partnership with a firm called Holistic AI who do AI audits, and we were so I met them through a client who was auditing all of their tech, and we've since formed a kind of partnership with them. Now, what that means is that we expect all of our providers to go through their assurance, and also we're recommending the assurance process to our clients. So it's a really robust expert service. I mean, there are different versions of it. I'm not a legal expert, but they will provide interpretations of the law in the process that they take people through. So I'm not kind of slopey-shouldered about it, but I think we can't be experts in everything.
Yes.
So we're assessment experts, but we understand the law that will come, that's in the UK is going to be... We originally thought that it would allow for quite a lot of innovation, but actually I think the general areas, the interpretation of it is going to be really quite prohibitive.
Yes.
So we know that that's coming our way. In fact, everything we do at the moment, we're already applying the explainability, the transparency, bias, auditability criteria to it. And obviously in the US, I mean, US is difficult because it's state legislation. So you could be in one place and it would say this and another. So I think the general thinking is we go for the most strict.
Sort of strict. And
cover
everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, and I think the US assessment providers are all over this. And if they're not, we wouldn't really work with them.
Yes.
So,
But it's an interesting development around this. I mean, you know, what you shared earlier is that with verbal reasoning, simple SJTs, they're undermined now. Then you have also to do, so you've just got a sort of process vulnerability thing to think about. Now you've also got a legal vulnerability piece to factor in for this as well. And it's suddenly becoming a lot more complex it's not just about redesigning, but it's redesigning in a way that doesn't expose to more danger around all of this.
Yeah, and I think validations will become much more of a thing for us to be helping with. So, you know, typically we would always look to validate with automated solutions. We tend to do sort of check for adverse impact in the first few hundred candidates. We will use pre-validated assessments, but I think recently we've done a couple of specific validations looking at predictive validity. You know, if I'm really honest, those are flawed. They're certainly not research study standard.
Yes.
Because real life is not a scientific research.
No.
It's not scientific research, and hiring managers making ratings and chasing people for those. And, you know, we don't have aligned performance rating systems in organisations. We're not allowed to have the data.
Yes.
You know, there's all sorts of... we have such issues around some of our jurisdictions don't collect any ethnicity data.
Yes.
So we can't show adverse impact in predictive validity studies or or in the validation studies, it is difficult.
Tricky, isn't it?
It's difficult, but we love clients who want to invest in it, and that's what we want to do for them. We think it's a tough nut to crack, that one, but it's going to happen more.
Yes,
because they've got to prove it.
They have, and I think that just from a legislative point of view, that explainability, that auditability, but all of that ultimately goes back to, well, what did you say you wanted to measure?
Yeah.
Can you show that you're measuring that on a consistent and fair and objective way? And it comes back then ultimately to first principles.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about what occupational psychology can bring to the recruitment process. For somebody who came into this sector without any kind of originally psychology understanding at all, I just didn't realise the frameworks, I suppose, and the very detailed education, reflection that has gone on how, through occupational psychology, you use your data well in the validation. And part of the reason that we ended up with the whole Amazon withdrawal of AI 6-7 years ago was because you had a data scientist trying to do predictability, but without the education, the training, and the frameworks that the occupational psychology brings. And I think therefore that advisory piece is so important. I think it's going to be important for many companies that they're going to need to, because they're going to be awash with applications, that they look to that independent expertise to tell them, right, what is a good way to do this? How do I determine whether X vendor or Y vendor is better? Because there's so many silver bullets that are being thrown out there. Oh, yeah, if you use this, it'll solve all your problems. But as we've just discussed, it's never that easy, Claudia, is it?
And nobody likes to hear it depends. But honestly, it feels to me at the moment this is a good time to be what we would normally be quite cautious. We're not, and this is why I made the joke about I'm not a TA disruptor. I wouldn't ever call myself that. That's not my job. My job is to protect people from doing the wrong things and advise them. If we can innovate, great. But that's not my primary motive. My motive is to do this properly.
Yes.
And so I think that's it's a really exciting time for that. And I went to PSYOP, which is the US conference last year, and I'm going hopefully again in April to speak on the subject. But I felt really excited by the way the US psychologists were tackling it. There were a lot of lawyers around, but they were saying this is an exciting time for us because this is about first principles.
It is.
It's not about, and we can support and protect, and we can remind people of why experts are needed.
Exactly.
So, because I think for a while, it was almost as if you felt a little bit ashamed of being an expert. You're not kind of innovative enough. You're not forward thinking enough, and it's frustrating.
Yes. And I think it's such a great point, Claudia. And what's interesting for me is, and part of getting different views on this podcast is that you have people who want to disrupt and change, and we do because we have things like social mobility that we want to make significant improvements.
Of course.
And so everybody's been sort of tweaking around the edges, trying to make adjustments there, but not making the significant improvement. So while we've got an opportunity to disrupt, what we would be super careful about is that we're not disrupting and moving things backwards rather than forwards, in which case you need to talk to the experts around it. And that's why I wanted to share that. This is a time for subject matter experts to ensure that we're moving forward in the right way, and that we're not being disrupted to the point that we're actually moving society backwards rather than forwards.
I absolutely. I mean, if there's one topic I could be passionate about, is the fact that, when we talk about diversity and social mobility, I was trained in the late 80s, early 90s, right? I did my master's in the early 90s. It was core to everything I was trained in, was fairness.
Yes.
So, it feels like a new language, but it's not for us, because the whole point of what we do is that. And social mobility has always been a very primary consideration. You know, there isn't a psychologist I know, an occupational psychologist I know, who doesn't have that absolutely ingrained in them.
Yes.
And if they are, they're probably not very good. So,
Yes.
you know, I can be very passionate about that. And it's almost like, this isn't new. This isn't new.
Yes. Well, I think that's such a great way to end on, that, you know, GenAI presents some interesting challenges for us, but the way that we can address them can still involve and should involve first principles of things that we've learned about fairness, and particularly the way that has been trained and ingrained in the way that occupational chartered psychologists go about things. And let's hope that 2024 is going to be the year of the chartered psychologist to bring better things into the way that we recruit and hire. But Claudia, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for coming along to the podcast.
No problem. Enjoyed it. Thank you.